This week's sponsor is Anchor.fm. In our experience as podcasters, Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. They have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great, and they'll distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. If you're interested in monetizing your podcast, Anchor sets you up with sponsors with no minimum listenership. What could be easier than that? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. The Chains of Reason podcast, where we link the chains of reason that affects our daily lives in society and culture, including, but not limited to, sports and politics.
Welcome to the Chains of Reason podcast. I'm your host, DJ Grand, and I'm with my brother, Jerry.
Hello.
Welcome back. I hope autumn kept your seat warm. And as always, we're here with our producer, Ryan.
Hey.
Today, we're going to talk about a subject that it really means a lot to me myself. I love Ayn Rand. She's the person that got me into thinking through my own head. She got me into philosophy itself, which, her books then led to the greater study of philosophy. And we're going to be talking about the Fountainhead today. It's a very long book, but it's very complex. And we're going to, at least this podcast, we're going to delve into the characters. And on the next podcast, we're going to talk about the theme. And there's more than one. Now, the Fountainhead, basically, just to give an overview, is about an architect. And he's a special kind of architect, at least in this novel, in this world, because he thinks through his own head. And that is important because what Ayn Rand does in the Fountainhead, she called it secondhand lives. But what I like to think of it is you either think through your own head or you think through other people's heads. Other people do your thinking for you, in other words. And Howard Roark thought through his own head. He believed in it should be his work, his way, and in fact, he does say that during the story. Roark is an individualist who lives for his own sake and for the sake of his own happiness, and I think that is for the sake of his own happiness is very important. The Fountainhead is it's an absolute American novel, and the reason why I call it that is because in a way it's about the pursuit of happiness. And that's what Roark lives for. He lives for his own happiness. And it's even in the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness. That's why that is an American idea. An individualist in a man's soul is what Howard Roark is. It's about his soul. It's rejection of self-sacrifice as a moral ideal. And Roark even says, and this is a clue into his character, he says he doesn't build to have clients. He has clients in order to build. That means other people don't come first. What comes first to him is the productive work. And that is his ideal, work done his way. The theme, and this Ayn Rand even said this, and I'll talk about this more in the next podcast, but I think it needs to be known in the start. Ayn Rand said that the theme of the Fountainhead is individualism versus collectivism, but however, not in politics, but inside a man's soul. And that is very important. Now, like I already stated, it's generally about either you think through your own head or you think through other people's head. I guess for me to diagram the Fountainhead, all the characters, they line up so perfectly. If you take two triangles and you turn them sideways and have the points touching each other, and it sort of looks like an infinity symbol except for it's triangles. Well, in the center of that triangle is Howard Roark, or those two triangles where they connect is Howard Roark. He is the center of the story, and the others revolve around him. And in the left, we're going to put on the top is Ellsworth Toohey, and I'll explain him later as we go along. On the bottom of that left triangle is Peter Keating. He's the first one I'm going to talk about, and he's also the name of the first chapter. The right triangle is on the top right side is Gil Whinin, and on the bottom right side is the only major female character, and that's Dominique. and she gets married multiple times. So she starts out as Franklin, then she goes to Keating, and then she goes to Whinin, and eventually she marries Howard Roark. So she ends up having 4 names.
She has a lot of fun in that.
Yes, and she's probably the most confusing character, at least for me when I first read it. But we'll just call her Dominique. So let's start off with Peter Keating. Keating is actually selfish in the contemporary view of what selfishness is. Ayn Rand was presenting in this book a whole different definition of selfishness and what she called rational selfishness. Keating, if you notice in the book, he does everything he can, steps over people, uses people to advance his own career. And when he's just starting out in the architecture firm of Franken and Hayer, he steps over Tim Davis and gets him basically fired so he can take his job. And then he goes and gets he actually uses his boss, Guy Franken, the owner, to get the chief architect to leave the firm, and that job is now open, so Franken takes that. Keating takes that. The worst of all Keating's stepping on people is what he did to, at the time, the other owner. The firm's called Franken and Hayer. What he did to Hayer, he already knew that he was a vulnerable person. He already had a stroke. And Keating went there and pressured him to basically resign. And it caused him to have that second stroke, and that kills him. In a way, Keating murdered him. Not like with his hands.
Manslaughter.
Kind of, yes. But no one figures that out in the book. Because the doctors even said in the book, he's ready to have a second stroke.
Yeah.
And that was the killer. And that allows Keating to step in and now becomes the other owner, takes his place. So every one of those. Yeah. Every one of those, he steps on people, which is what is the conventional definition of selfishness. However, I'm here to say, he was selfless, and Ayn Rand actually is the one who's saying it. He was selfless. If you watch the movie, a great example of this, now this is not in the book, but it's a good example that it's in the movie. When the Enright House is built, Peter Keating, and they're having a party inside that, and to celebrate the opening of the Enright House. Peter Keating goes and takes a poll and talks to every other person in the party to find out what their opinion of it was. And he did that to form his own opinion of it. In other words, he was thinking through other people's heads.
Yeah.
He is the quintessential selfless man.
So he doesn't want to say what he's like feeling or thinking because he doesn't want to. I don't even think he thinks, because if you notice in the book in the beginning, it's his mother that tells him to be an architect. Mm-hmm. He wanted to be an artist, so he goes and does and becomes an architect. Yeah.
When he's in school in the Stanton Institute of Technology, he doesn't even do any thinking for himself. Howard Roark does his work for him, and he just copies of the predecessors of the old times, the Renaissance and the Gothic. He just really does not think through his own head. He thinks through other people's head. In that sense, he has no self. What he wants is fame and admiration. He wants, and what is that? And that's other people.
Yeah.
It's thinking of other. That's what he cares about. He doesn't care to think about through his own head at all. He advances his career at the expense of others, which is what I've already talked about. He has no problem using other people's work as his own. He is, like I said, the conventional selfish man. Keating actually lacks a self. He has no strong values, no independent mind. He only cares about being a success in the eyes of others and minds of others. He cared about being a success in the eyes of his mother. I mean, he has no sense of self himself, no values of his own. It's what other people value, so therefore he values it. He achieves everything that society wants out of life, but in the end, he lacks true happiness. And I start off by saying the pursuit of happiness. He does what Ellsworth Toohey and others, he sacrifices himself and ends up being totally unhappy about it.
Yeah, and so that's like a common thing you see, I guess, in everyday life then, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's why it applies to life. I think this book so much is applicable to everyday life because you have a choice. You can think for yourself or you can let others think for you.
There's a lot of Peter Keatings out there today.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. in Atlas Shrugged, her magnum opus, what I think is her better book, her next book, she called them parasites. And in a way, that's what it is. You're parasitical on other people's minds.
So how do you... Oh, go ahead.
She brings parasites up in this novel.
Oh, she does too, absolutely. But she really emphasizes it in Atlas Shrugged. Go ahead, Ryan.
How do you like get through that when you're, I guess, as an individual, when you're... Because it's good to, like, you know, when you want to please people or kind of maybe... you find somebody with like similar ideas or just I don't know, ideas you never thought of, and you're like, well, it's like when is that like good to? There has to be like a amount that's good, you know what I mean? Like if you like learn something for someone, learn that and like use it in another way, but still be like
as long as you're look. This is Ayn Rand's ideas. See, this isn't mine, so I can't say I thought of these.
Yeah.
However, so in a way, I'm
as
using
a character
her,
trait.
Yes, I'm using her. However, I accepted them through my own head. I thought them out through my own head to make sure they were right. It's not like I just agreed with it because it was on the paper, which is what a lot of people do. That's what the P.D. Keatings are. They just hear something, especially the fake news today, about what's going on with Trump. They hear it and they believe it without thinking about it through their own heads. So as long as you can, absolutely, you can accept ideas from other people, I think it's necessary. But you have to come to that conclusion on your own of whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
You can't just take it at face value. And as long as you're thinking through your own head about it, you can accept those other ideas.
Okay.
A good example, this is the last thing I want to say about Keating before we move on to the next character. He ends up marrying Dominique Franken. He becomes Dominique Keating. And throughout the marriage, she just acquiesces to him all the time. Whatever you want, dear. Whatever you want to do, dear. And eventually it pisses Keating off. And he says to her, "Where is your eye?" And which is so ironic coming from him. And that's what frustrated him about the marriage. And Dominique's reply was great. He says, "But where's yours, Peter?" And that defines what Peter Keating is. He had no eye, no sense of self.
That's like getting what kind of getting what you deserve, in the sense of a lot of people in like relationship stuff want to find someone exactly like them, when it's like, that does sound good right off the bat. And you're like, of course you want to, date yourself, I guess, if you want to say that. But then if you find someone like that, it becomes extremely boring or just like repetitive. And like that whole scene and stuff, like where it's just, you're basically talking to yourself and there's no like fun in life or just interesting things and stuff. So,
well, I think Dominique was just reflecting him. Reflecting him.
She knew.
Yeah, she did. So. She did. And this is another part of the
taste
story.
Of his own medicine,
Yes, but she married him as a punishment to herself. She even says that earlier in the story. She says, "If I ever want to punish myself for some great evil, I'll marry you, Peter." And she was punishing herself.
That's a weird
And when we get to Dominique, which is the last character we talk about, I'll explain a little bit more about why or how she punishes herself. And like I said, she was probably the hardest character for me to come to grasp with. Now let's move on to the same triangle on the left side on the top with Ellsworth Toohey. And he is probably the most evil character in all of literature. And the reason he's so evil is he knows what he's doing. And his purpose throughout the entire novel is to take mediocrity and raise it up. And his reason for doing that is to bring greatness down. And the reason he wants to do that is because he knows he's not great himself.
Yeah.
He has no creative spirit whatsoever. So he has to do that to make himself feel better. And the problem with it is he knows it's wrong and still does it. And that's what makes him so evil.
What organization does that today from the top down? The UAW. The union.
Explain yourself. Go ahead.
Well, it's all without the union, they're not needed. These stewards, the presidents, they're not needed.
We can go further than that.
They kind of make it look like you need us, and you're selfless. The group, without the group, you can't take care of yourself.
You're absolutely right, but you can go further than that. What other huge entity does that?
The government.
The government. I think they do it. They do it worse because they want our entire public school system is breeding dependency, and this book is about independence versus dependence. Peter Keating and Ellsworth Toohey are dependent on others. And I'll get to Gil Whinin too, him as well. They're all dependent on others.
Dependent/entitlement.
Yes. But the point is that in order to be dependent, you have to have others. And this is that whole point. Like I said, her original working title for this book was Secondhand Lives. And because all these people live secondhanded. They don't live through their own head.
Yeah.
So the next character we're talking about is Ellsworth Toohey. He's on that top left side of that diagram hope you got in your mind. And he has a great hatred for integrity. And Howard Roark is the symbol of integrity. He's a man of integrity. He lives by what he says. And Toohey realizes that and has to break Roark down, because Roark is the embodiment of individualism, while Toohey is the embodiment of collectivism. He even says he learned early when he was talking in a religious setting that he had to become a collector of souls. And once again, what do you need to be a collector of souls? Other people.
Sounds like in the previous episode we did Full Metal Alchemist, he sounds like Father.
That's exactly right. That is precisely right. Very
it's
good.
The anime version of it.
Very applicable. That's why
that went in my head.
That was so philosophical. I wish I would have came up with that when I was talking, when we were talking about it. Toohey's goal with Keating and all the artists is to do what I said. He knows Peter Keating is mediocre, and even he praises I forget her name now, but she wrote a book and it was the worst piece of trash. Everyone hated it, yet he praised it. And the reason he was doing that was to bring greatness down, because when you bring mediocrity up, greatness has to come down. And he knew that. And there's the evil of it. It's almost diabolical. Toohey wanted to obliterate the concept of greatness. He knew Howard Roark was great. Mm-hmm. He looked at it and he knew right away, and knew that if he exists, I can't exist in the same world, because he'll wipe me out.
Because he can't compete. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. He has no way of competing. Toohey gets Keating to disavow the only value that Keating actually possesses. And the most insidious part of this little scenario is it's Toohey's own niece, Katherine Halsey. That is the one person that Keating actually thought through his own head. He actually loved. And Halls Lee is Ayn Rand had her in there, and she's not one of the major characters, but she is important nonetheless, because Katherine Halls Lee represents living selflessly. She comes to Toohey in a scene and says, "Uncle, I've done everything I've been taught. I've been taught by you and other great men that the only way to live is to live selflessly in the service of others. Why am I so unhappy? Why is it doing this to me?" And Ellsworth, and this is why I think he's actually a representation of the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Ellsworth says, notice what you're saying. It's all I, Katherine Halsey. It's all me. You got to understand that you're supposed to be doing it for them, not for you. And the reason why that's like Immanuel Kant said, if you do anything and you don't do it strictly out of a sense of duty, then it has no moral worth whatsoever. In other words, if you help a lady across the street and you were doing it because you felt good, you just wanted to help her because it was the right thing to do, it has to be done strictly out of duty, out of obligation, or it's no good. Which, to me, that's absolute evil. That's because
the Boy Scouts are good people.
Yeah, they are, but they shouldn't do it out of a sense of duty. They should do it because they want to do it. I'm just talking about
the badge they get. So.
Well, I think since you brought that up, I think we need to define what self-sacrifice is. Are you feeling secure? Can I use you in this example?
Go right ahead.
When you have a baby, and
no idea what you're talking about.
When you have a baby, and first of all, what is like your favorite piece of anime? What is like the most important to you, or video game? It doesn't matter.
Like what? Like a
what
title?
Do you value the most of?
Like storytelling. I don't know if that's what you're like asking, or like what? It's like.
How about pick a video game?
Okay.
What's the video game would you value the most?
That's a tough one. I don't know. This game Lunar right here is definitely one of my favorites.
Okay,
I like it a lot. Lunar.
Let's say a new game's coming out,
okay,
and you really, really want it, and you only have, I'm going to say it's $60. I don't know, but you only have $60 at this particular time, and you have no way of getting any of their money.
Yeah.
And you have this baby, And you can take the $60 and buy food, clothing for the baby, or you can take that $60 and buy your lunar game. Yeah. Which would you do?
Definitely go with the baby one.
Okay. The question, though, is that a sacrifice?
I guess in a small sense it is, maybe. I don't know.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but it shouldn't be a sacrifice.
It should. Okay.
This is why it shouldn't be, because you should, and I'm sure you're going to value the baby more than that video
for sure
game.
Yeah.
It would be a sacrifice if you value the baby more and still bought the video game, because what you're doing is you're taking a greater value and sacrificing it for a lesser value. That is the definition of self-sacrifice.
But isn't there like priorities and stuff, or is that like some?
But it's still value. Your priorities are your values.
Okay.
I mean, value judgments is the essence of ethics.
All right.
And you're making a value judgment, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it's a variable. It's an X. You can put anything in there. You can put a car in there. You can put whatever. It doesn't matter. If you valued your family or baby more, and you still went and bought that car, you are sacrificing, because you're taking a lesser value and putting it above a greater value. Now, this is according to your own values, not what I'm putting on you.
Yeah.
According to your own values. If you take anything of a lesser value and put it above that greater value, you are committing a sacrifice.
Okay.
Now, to me, that's a sin. Because you should stay with your higher values, because the higher values are there for a reason.
Yeah.
They mean more to you.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to define that, because this book is about sacrifice.
Yeah.
I mean, Ellsworth Toohey wants you to sacrifice. He wants you to sacrifice your artistic ability. He wants you to sacrifice your independent judgment. And if all those things are of value to you, and you go ahead and sacrifice it, then if they're of value to you, you are committing a sin. And I think if you had your own judgment, actually Keating doesn't, but if you did and you had a value and you sacrificed it anyways, you're committing a great wrong on yourself, and then probably your family too, especially in my scenario that I brought up. Mm-hmm. So let's get back to the story. When, as far as Toohey goes, did I finish the Katherine Halsey story? Oh yeah, I talked about, okay. So as far as Toohey goes, he recognizes when he sees Dominique Franken that she worships greatness. And he opposes Roark's work. And here's where I told you Dominique was on the right side of that diagram, on the bottom right side, and Toohey's is on the top left side. Well, here's where they're connected, because they both want to take Roark down, but they're doing it for totally different reasons. Toohey's doing it because he sees Roark as great, and because he's not, he has to bring them down. Dominique does it because she doesn't want to be connected to the world, and she knows that a world that Howard Roark's in that will destroy Howard Roark, she would rather destroy him herself than allow the world to destroy him.
Yeah.
Which is why she ends up marrying Keating and then Whinin after that. Mm-hmm. She's doing this to try and destroy Howard Roark. Toohey capitalizes on Dominique's motives against Roark and to bring her into alliance with him. And like I said, albeit for different motives. But after Dominique tells Toohey that she thinks that they might be wrong, that Roark is about Roark and the world, because Roark is starting to get jobs through all. Dominique and Ellsworth work to destroy Roark's career. They give buildings that should be designed by Howard Roark, they give them to Peter Keating.
Yeah. And
they prop up his career, even though he doesn't deserve it. They both do that, but they do it for different motives. But the Stoddard Temple is so important for this, because in the Stoddard Temple, Toohey sets Roark up. He goes to this weak-willed philanthropist, let's say, someone with a lot of money, and tells him you need to build a temple, but says Toohey says hire Howard Roark, but tell him to do it as a temple to human greatness. And leave. And the guy leaves and goes to temples around the world to study it. And Roark does exactly that. Exactly as he was hired to do. He builds a temple to individuality. And when the guy comes back, he sees it, and it's not any of the temples that he's seen when he was on his trips. Mm-hmm. To him, it's sacrilegious, because it's against the group and for the individual. And Toohey convinces him to sue him for fraud, and he wins in court. And Toohey set him up. And that basically was, Dominique was starting to falter, And that brought Dominique back into the realm with Toohey to go against Howard Roark. See, Toohey sees Roark as an existential threat to him because as a spiritual second-hander, there's no room for Toohey in Roark's world. I've already mentioned that. He's so focused on Roark but yet Roark barely notices Toohey. And a good example of this, which is why I brought up the Starter Temple, is after the Starter Temple is done and he's lost Roark has lost the lawsuit, he goes back to the Starter Temple and he stares at it and he looks at it, and Toohey meets him for the first time there, and he says, we're alone. This is the first time that we can meet like this. Tell me what you think of me. And Roark has a great reply. He says, but I don't think of you. That is absolutely perfect. Yeah. And that kills Toohey, because Toohey wants to be in the minds of others.
Because he did all that work to just get back at this guy, and it basically didn't affect him.
Well, it affected his career,
yeah,
but didn't affect his motives.
Exactly.
It didn't affect his spirit.
Yeah.
He kept going because those things don't matter to him. To him, what matters, he did the work. He built it. And even though it was defaced, he still had the drawings of the original picture. That was his. It's sort of like defacing the Mona Lisa. Da Vinci still painted it. It was still his.
Yeah,
even if you do a mustache on that. Yeah. Yes, exactly right. You cannot take that away from him. That's precisely it. Toohey's main goal is power over other men, which he's trying to accomplish by collecting souls. He tries to kill men's sense of values, kill their pursuit of happiness. Now, in the beginning, I said this was about the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
Well, Toohey tries to kill that. He knows that he has nothing creative or spiritual to offer, and his great evil is that he knows it and relishes in it and sets out to destroy that spirit in others. So that's basically it for Ellsworth Toohey. Like I said, I think he's the most evil man in all of literature. The next one, we go to the right top triangle, and it's Gil Whinin. Now, Gil Whinin, to me, is Frederick Nietzsche. Frederick Nietzsche is about will to power and stepping over other people to get power. I mean, his Beyond Good and Evil is about moving beyond morality and doing what it takes to become great. Mm-hmm. Whinin uses his own will. He even breaks a man of integrity. He hires a guy. First of all, Whinin is the owner of the Banner, a media empire, and he hires a man who has become famous for writing about individualism, and he hires him only on the stipulation that from here on in you will write about collectivism. And he basically breaks the man's integrity. He uses his will as a stronger will against that man, and he wins. And that's how he breaks other people. That's what he does for his power. He gets power over people by breaking their will. In a way, Gil Whinin is close to Howard Roark. When I say that, I mean only when he's away from the Banner. He has an art museum that is beneath his penthouse, and he doesn't let anyone in there except Dominique right before they get married. She's the first person to enter other than staff. And it's that personal to him. But those pieces of art in there are all recognition of creativity. Whinin does have that potential to be like Roark. And like Dominique, he believes greatness and idealism has no chance in the world, and integrity has no chance, which is why he sets out to break men of integrity. Whinin makes a hobby of breaking men of integrity. That's what he did to Dwight Carson to justify, that's that writer I was talking about, to justify himself for his own betrayal of integrity.
That's a control issue too.
Oh, absolutely.
He controls them from the. Like he tries to control Roark, but Roark does, almost like the weak-minded, because the weak-minded fall for it.
He does try at one point to control Roark.
And Roark doesn't fall for it, or doesn't even stand.
Absolutely, he tells him to shut up. But I'm glad you brought that up. What do you have to do, though, to control other people?
Break their will.
But live through their minds. You're not living through your own mind at that point. You're living through their mind. It's their mind that matters.
Correct.
See, and that's how Gil Whinin is a second-hander.
He got rich doing that, though. He actually built his newspaper by doing such a thing.
But he got rich by pandering to the masses. See, he thought...
Giving them what they wanted.
Exactly. What is that again? pandering to the masses, living through other people's heads, the masses' heads this time. Correct. And he thought that gave him power. He thought he literally had power over people because he
became a false power. I see now.
Well, even at the end when defending Roark for the Cortlandt homes, which Roark designed with the stipulation that it had to be built his way, and when it wasn't built his way, Roark blew the building up.
Right.
And so, when defending Roark for that, Whinin discovers that the public sentiment is against Roark and that he, in fact, has no power at all. In fact, he's so weak, he fires Ellsworth Toohey, and he's so weak, he has to bring him back. He capitulates to the board and says, he can come back now.
Because of loss of readership
and revenue.
Yes.
At that point he realizes he had no power at all. It's kind of like the master and slave relationship. He thought he was the master, but in essence, he was actually a slave to the masses, and they were the master. So it kind of flipped on its head.
Right. Correct.
He was forced to sell out, and like Keating, at the end, he's spiritually defeated, and that pursuit of happiness is gone. In fact, he was already spiritually empty. When you first meet Gil Whinin, he's contemplating suicide. He has a gun to his head, and he doesn't do it because he has no feeling either way of life or death. And that's what keeps him alive.
Right, but after the trial, that was his trial. He ended up doing it anyways, correct?
Well, no, that's in the movie. In the book, he does not commit suicide.
Okay.
But he does in the movie. That's the one thing Ayn Rand did change.
I see. Okay.
So let's move on to that bottom corner before we run out of time. That bottom right corner of the diagram is Dominique, and she is torn by idealism and pessimism. She doesn't want anything in the world. She doesn't want to be tied to the world. And the first time she feels tied to the world is when she meets Howard Roark. And I got to bring up that so-called rape scene. He goes and after a back and forth in the quarry, he sees her, she sees him. They're playing with each other. They both know that each other wants. Mm-hmm. And the proof that what Howard Roark does, she brings him in to fix her fireplace
that she broke.
No, she scratched, and he takes basically a crowbar, hits it, and goes, "Okay, now it's broke."
Yeah.
And then he says, "Okay, I've measured it. When it comes back in, call me and I'll fix it." Well, he sends a short little stubby guy, and it was a test on Dominique because Dominique wanted to see him, and that pisses her off. And when he comes when they meet each other, he says to her, "You better not stop staring at me. It's going to give people the wrong ideas." And Roark perfectly says, "No, I think they're going to get the exact right idea," because he knew that they both wanted each other, and to him that was an invitation for him to go to her place that night, and what everyone claims to be a rape. And now Ayn Rand says, if it was a rape, it was a rape by engraved invitation. So, while she's beating him, he grabs her and she starts beating him in the chest. She really wasn't beating Howard Roark. What she was doing was beating the fact that Howard Roark is tying her to the world. She does not want to be tied. She even says in the novel, "Once I love something, I know I'll be tied to the world," and that's what Howard Roark does to her for the first time. Now, a good metaphor for Dominique is the scene where she takes a statue of a Greek goddess that she absolutely loves, and she drops it down the air shaft, and she destroys it. Why? Because she knew that it would tie her to the world, and the world would destroy it. So she would rather destroy that statue instead of have it destroyed by the world. And that is exactly what she does to Howard Roark. That is her whole point of why, and this is why she's so confusing. She marries both of his basic enemies. At least at the first, Gil Whinin was an enemy.
Yeah.
And that was so confusing. Well, she does that because she's trying to destroy him. And in a way, if you saw the one you loved marry and say that hurts deep. That hurts.
Yeah.
And that was her point of it. And she was also doing it to punish herself.
She needs to go to therapy.
Huh?
She needs therapy.
Ayn Rand described Ayn Rand described her the the character of Dominique as herself in a bad mood.
Wow, yeah. Well,
so
that's a good way to put it.
And she also put about that rape scene. She said, "This is my fantasy. I'll write it the way I want."
Yeah, it is interesting if you don't know who like wrote this book, and then when you get the backstory of that, just like, you know, yeah, that's the way she wanted to write it.
It makes a lot of sense. It really does. It ties everything together. I have a lot more to say, but I think we're going to have to move on because of time restraints. But I will say that she ends up marrying Whinin, and she does it in a very debasing way. She ends up prostituting herself to get Keating a job. I think it was a Stockbridge building, if I'm not mistaken. But the point is, she sells herself just to get Keating a job. And she's doing this, once again, to punish herself. And when she marries Whinin, she expects... She knew Keating was too weak to do anything to her, and that's why she had to leave Keating. That's the motivation for her to prostitute herself. And she meets Gil Whinin, expected to see the most despicable man on earth. But then she soon realizes that he actually isn't that bad away from the banner. In the banner, he's despicable, but away from the banner, she realizes, and they actually become comrades in arms when it comes to help fighting Roark and the Courtland Holmes. So now let's move on to the center of our diagram, and that's who this whole story was about, and that's Howard Roark. He is defined by his independence and integrity. Roark selfishly wants to do productive work for his own happiness, and he refuses to compromise his artistic integrity, so much so that he gets expelled from school. In the beginning, they tell him, do it like in the Gothic tradition, do it in the Renaissance tradition. And he saw no need in that. In fact, it was inconceivable to him because he wanted to do it out of his own mind. Roark betrays Ayn Rand's radical definition of the virtue of selfishness. Before, selfishness was not defined this way. Roark is selfish because he's independent and he thinks on his own, which is rational selfishness. I can't get the page to turn over. In the climax, Roark destroys the buildings because the buildings that he wrote, the Courtland buildings he made, and he designed with the agreement that it would be built his way. And to compromise on that would compromise on his integrity. And if you think about this, the last thing I'll say about Roark and his integrity, him sticking to his integrity, even in the beginning, when he got turned down for the Manhattan Bank, remember they said you could have this contract, except we got changed just the facade just a little bit.
Yeah.
Him sticking to guns on that and saying no, and the guy even says to him, "Why are you acting so selfishly for your integrity?" And he says, Roark says, "This is the most selfish thing I'll ever see a man do." Had he not done that, he would not have gotten the Enright House. He would not have gotten all the other things because people would have, Gil Whinin hires him because he goes around the United States and sees buildings that Roark had built and says, "I want my house like that." Well, he wouldn't have gotten that had he compromised.
Yeah.
So his integrity was at stake, and it is at the Courtland Homes. That's why he ends up blowing up the Courtland Homes. I think we're just about running out of time for this episode. In the next episode, I'll talk about the themes of the Fountainhead, which are just as important as a character because it plays out. These themes play out in the lives of the characters. Do you guys have anything else to say before I close it?
No, it was pretty well explained.
Yeah, there's a lot of deep things with these characters, so you did really well, you know.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for listening. This is the Change of Reason podcast. You can get in touch with us at our website at changeofreasonpositive.com. And on there, you hit the contact and you'll see our email. And you can follow us on all of our social media. Once again, this is the Change of Reason podcast. How can anyone be so lightened when the truth is so poorly lit?